What if the friendly clown entertaining children at your local charity event was secretly burying victims beneath his own home? In this psychological deep dive, we explore how John Wayne Gacy's troubled father-son dynamic and early signs of psychological distress evolved into his Pogo the Clown persona. You will witness his compartmentalization of a double life, from marriage and family life to developing his murderous modus operandi. Discover how the disappearance that broke the case revealed the crawl space graveyard, and understand the narcissistic personality patterns behind one of America's most notorious serial killers. John Wayne Gacy was born in Chicago, Illinois, in 1942. His early childhood unfolded in a working-class neighborhood, a setting typical of the post-war American urban landscape. The family's economic circumstances were modest, reflecting the broader challenges of the era. His family structure included his parents and two sisters, creating a seemingly ordinary domestic unit. However, the household was marked by significant tension. According to accounts from contemporaries, his father struggled with alcoholism, which profoundly impacted the family dynamic. The father's relationship with his children, particularly with John, was described as difficult and often harsh. In his autobiography, it is mentioned that verbal and physical discipline were not uncommon, establishing a climate of fear and insecurity during his formative years. Psychological studies suggest that such an early environment, characterized by parental conflict and emotional neglect, can be a critical factor in personality development. Researchers note that chronic stress in childhood can shape a person's coping mechanisms and interpersonal skills. For a young child, these experiences in his Chicago home became foundational, intertwining with his earliest memories and perceptions of authority and familial love. This period laid the initial groundwork for the complex psychological profile that would later emerge. Yet this foundational period was far from nurturing, as the home environment itself became a primary source of the chronic stress that would so deeply shape him. The father-son dynamic between John Wayne Gacy and his father, John Stanley Gacy, was profoundly troubled. According to biographical sources, the elder Gacy frequently subjected his son to harsh verbal abuse, openly belittling his efforts and character. In his autobiography, Gacy recalled his father's constant comparisons, stating, "He would tell me I would never amount to anything, that I was not half the man my sisters were." This relentless criticism created a home environment saturated with tension and inadequacy. Specific incidents of this abuse were seared into young John's memory. One particularly humiliating event occurred when his father publicly mocked a small business venture John had started as a teenager, deriding his ambition in front of neighbors. Such interactions systematically dismantled the boy's self-esteem. Psychological studies note that persistent parental rejection and invalidation during formative years can severely warp a child's self-concept. Researchers suggest this dynamic fosters deep-seated feelings of worthlessness and a desperate, often pathological, need for external validation. This foundational experience of never measuring up to his father's impossible standards is seen by many psychologists as a critical factor. It planted the seeds for the profound insecurities and the fractured identity that would later manifest. The constant tension in his childhood home did not merely create sadness. It forged a deep-seated rage and a fractured sense of self that would have devastating consequences in his adult life. Yet these profound psychological wounds would soon find expression through more tangible symptoms that emerged in his youth. From his earliest years, John Wayne Gacy experienced significant health issues that foreshadowed future psychological distress. According to his autobiography, he began suffering from fainting spells, medically termed syncope, around the age of 11. These blackouts were frequent and unexplained, causing considerable concern within his family. Around this same period, doctors also suspected he had a potential heart condition, though a definitive diagnosis remained elusive throughout his childhood. These recurring medical crises profoundly impacted his developmental years. The unpredictable nature of his fainting spells created a constant state of anxiety and vulnerability, likely fostering feelings of being different from his peers. Research into childhood trauma suggests that chronic, unexplained health problems can severely disrupt a child's sense of security and bodily autonomy. Psychologists note that such experiences may contribute to the formation of a fragmented self-identity, where the individual feels a lack of control over their own physical being. This early history of physiological distress is viewed by many analysts as a critical component of his psychological foundation. The interplay between his physical ailments and his emerging personality created a complex internal landscape. While his father-son relationship was previously discussed, These health struggles represented a separate, yet equally powerful source of formative stress, shaping his perceptions of weakness, control, and his own body long before his later actions manifested. But this fragile equilibrium was about to be shattered by a single, unforeseen event that would plunge him into a new and terrifying reality. The John Wayne Gacy case profoundly influenced criminal profiling methodologies and investigative techniques in the late 20th century. It provided law enforcement with critical psychological insights into the behavior of organized serial offenders. Investigators learned that such individuals could maintain a facade of normalcy and community involvement, effectively hiding in plain sight for extended periods. Psychological studies note that Gacy exemplified an organized offender who planned his crimes, used manipulation to gain victim trust, and displayed a high degree of control at crime scenes. This contrasted with disorganized offenders, whose crimes are often impulsive and leave more forensic evidence. The case highlighted the dangerous potential of a dual identity, where a public persona of affability masked private violent compulsions. Specific profiling advancements emerged directly from this investigation. The understanding that a serial offender could be a married homeowner with a stable job forced a significant revision of early offender characteristics. Profilers began to place greater emphasis on behavioral analysis, such as studying an offender's methods of operation and their ritualistic behaviors, which are often psychologically driven. This shift helped move investigations beyond relying solely on physical evidence or witness descriptions. Furthermore, the Gacy investigation underscored the necessity of systematic, large-scale forensic operations, as seen with the exhumation of numerous victims from his property. This case demonstrated that meticulous crime scene analysis and victimology could reveal patterns crucial for identifying a perpetrator's habits and potential base of operations, thereby refining the overall profiling process for future complex serial investigations. This deeper understanding of criminal behavior consequently compelled investigators to confront unsettling questions about the nature of evil itself. The case of John Wayne Gacy presents a profound examination into the banality of evil, illustrating how extreme violence can coexist with a facade of ordinary social functioning. As a successful building contractor and a registered Democratic precinct captain, Gacy was deeply embedded in his community, even performing as a clown at children's parties. This stark duality forces a difficult question about human nature, suggesting a terrifying potential within individuals who appear entirely normal. Psychological perspectives highlight the mechanisms that enable such compartmentalization. Gacy's own writings and interviews reveal a capacity to rationalize his actions, separating his violent compulsions from his public identity. Researchers note that this dissociation is not uncommon in such cases, where a meticulously constructed persona serves to conceal profound internal turmoil. The individual functions within societal norms while privately engaging in acts that defy comprehension. From a philosophical standpoint, this case echoes Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil, where horrific acts are committed not by monsters, but by ordinary individuals who have suspended their moral judgment. It teaches us that the line between normalcy and depravity is not always clearly defined. The potential for such darkness exists as a latent possibility, challenging our comforting assumptions about human goodness and the recognizable signs of a predator. This understanding compels a more nuanced view of criminality, one that looks beyond superficial appearances to the complex psychological landscapes where evil can quietly reside. This unsettling realization therefore compels us to ask how society can identify and address these latent potentials before they manifest into catastrophic actions. Prevention and early intervention represent the most hopeful frontiers in averting tragedies similar to those committed by individuals like John Wayne Gacy. Psychological research indicates that recognizing a constellation of early warning signs is paramount. These can include a history of severe childhood trauma, persistent cruelty to animals, and profound social isolation. Studies show that such factors, when combined, can signal a need for urgent psychological support long before violent ideation solidifies into action. Social interventions are equally critical. Schools and communities serve as the first line of defense. Implementing robust mental health screenings in educational settings can identify at-risk youth. Furthermore, creating accessible community-based counseling services destigmatizes seeking help. Research demonstrates that connecting individuals with empathetic support networks and therapeutic resources during formative adolescent years can significantly alter life trajectories. Contemporary violence prevention models emphasize a multi-agency approach. This involves collaboration between schools, mental health professionals, and social services to create a safety net. Psychologists note that teaching emotional regulation and conflict resolution skills from a young age builds resilience. The goal is to interrupt the developmental pathway that leads from profound psychological injury to catastrophic violence, fostering a society where intervention precedes tragedy. In the autumn of 1956, an 11-year-old John Wayne Gacy suffered a severe head injury after being struck by a swing. This seemingly minor playground accident initiated a profound and troubling chapter in his young life. He was subsequently hospitalized, where medical examinations revealed a more serious underlying condition. A blood clot had formed near his brain. This discovery necessitated an extended hospital stay, which lasted for several months and kept him confined for observation and treatment. This prolonged isolation from his peers and the structured environment of school had a devastating impact on his development. He fell significantly behind in his education, creating academic struggles that would persist for years. More critically, this period severed his crucial social connections during a formative time. In his autobiography, he mentioned the profound loneliness and the sense of being an outsider that took root during these months. Psychologists note that such extended hospitalization can disrupt the natural process of social skill acquisition and identity formation in a child. The hospital stay, which began as a response to a physical trauma, ultimately became a pivotal psychological event. Research shows that childhood trauma, particularly involving isolation and medical vulnerability, can fundamentally shape a person's worldview. For Gacy, this experience is often cited as a critical juncture, a period where his relationship with the world around him was irrevocably altered, setting a foundation for the profound struggles that would later manifest. This disruption in his developmental foundation would soon manifest in tangible social consequences, creating a pattern of isolation that extended far beyond the hospital walls. John Gacy's social struggles began forming during his adolescent years, where he experienced profound difficulties connecting with his peers. Classmates from his school in Chicago recalled a young man who seemed perpetually on the outskirts of social circles. One former peer noted, "He was always by himself at lunch. You would never see him talking with a group of guys." This isolation was not solely by choice. His increasing weight issues became a significant source of mockery and exclusion from typical teenage activities. Teachers observed his inability to participate in physical education classes with ease, which further alienated him from his classmates. Psychological analysis suggests that such persistent social rejection during formative years can severely impact an individual's self-esteem and worldview. Gacy's own writings later reflected a deep-seated feeling of being an outsider, a sentiment that began solidifying in his youth. Researchers point to this pattern of social failure and isolation as a critical environmental factor. Without the development of healthy peer relationships, an individual may fail to learn crucial social cues and emotional regulation skills. This early marginalization created a foundation of resentment and loneliness, setting a trajectory that would later manifest in profoundly destructive ways. The absence of positive social reinforcement during adolescence is a recurring theme in understanding the development of his later behaviors. Yet this profound isolation would soon intersect with another dimension of human experience, one where his already fractured sense of self would face its most confusing test. John Wayne Gacy's initial encounters with sexuality were marked by profound confusion and internal conflict. In his teenage years, he experienced his first sexual encounter with a female family friend. According to his own later accounts, this event was not a positive or formative experience for him. He described feeling a deep sense of awkwardness and detachment during the encounter, which failed to provide any sense of emotional connection or clarity regarding his own sexual orientation. Psychological evaluations from later years highlight this period as critically formative. Experts note that such early, emotionally neutral or negative sexual experiences can contribute significantly to an individual's developing psychosexual framework. For Gacy, this encounter seemingly reinforced existing feelings of alienation rather than offering a path toward understanding his identity. Researchers suggest that the absence of positive reinforcement or guidance during these formative sexual milestones can exacerbate pre-existing psychological insecurities. This early experience appears to have deepened his internal conflict about his attractions. Instead of resolving questions about his orientation, it seemingly intensified his confusion and contributed to a pattern of repression. The dissonance between societal expectations and his personal experiences created a significant psychological burden. This foundational period is often viewed by psychologists as a key component in understanding the complex interplay between his sexuality and his later actions, establishing a pattern where intimacy became intertwined with conflict and deception. Yet this very pattern of repression would soon find expression in what appeared to be a complete reversal as he embarked on a path of outward conformity. In 1964, John Wayne Gacy entered his first marriage with Marlene Myers. Following their wedding, the couple relocated to Iowa, marking a significant new chapter in his life. This period represented a concerted effort to establish a conventional family structure and a stable public identity. Gacy began managing 3 Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants owned by his wife's family. He demonstrated considerable business acumen, successfully overseeing operations and contributing to their profitability. His professional drive extended into community involvement as he became an active member of the local Junior Chamber of Commerce, known as the JCs. His commitment was recognized with numerous awards, and he was eventually elected as a vice president of the local chapter. This civic engagement earned him respect and recognition within the community, solidifying his image as a promising and dependable young businessman. Psychological analysts often note that such periods of high-functioning social conformity can coexist with profound internal turmoil. Research into similar behavioral patterns suggests that intense investment in professional and community standing can sometimes serve as a compensatory mechanism. For Gacy, this phase of his life, filled with outward success and recognition, presented a stark contrast to the private reality that would later emerge. The drive for achievement and social validation, as recalled by contemporaries, appeared to be a powerful motivating force during these years. But how long could this carefully constructed public image withstand the pressures of Gacy's hidden compulsions? John Wayne Gacy's first serious encounter with the law occurred in 1968, a pivotal moment that shattered his public facade. While managing a fast food restaurant in Waterloo, Iowa, Gacy was accused of sodomy by a young male employee. The victim, a teenager, detailed a traumatic assault that took place at Gacy's own residence. This event led to Gacy's arrest, exposing a hidden side of his life that was starkly at odds with his image as a married businessman. Court records from the trial reveal a deeply disturbing case. Gacy was formally charged and subsequently convicted for the act of sodomy. In his autobiography, he later attempted to frame the incident as consensual, a claim directly contradicted by the court's findings and the victim's testimony. The judge, upon delivering the verdict, sentenced Gacy to a 10-year term at the Iowa Men's Reformatory. This conviction had immediate and devastating consequences for his personal life. His marriage, already under strain, dissolved completely as his wife filed for divorce, unable to reconcile the man she knew with the convicted criminal. Simultaneously, the business he had built collapsed, severing his ties to the community and any semblance of a normal life. Psychological studies suggest that this first conviction was not merely a legal punishment but a critical juncture. Researchers note that such a public shattering of one's identity can intensify feelings of resentment and alienation. For Gacy, the loss of his family, his business, and his social standing created a profound rupture. This period in prison is often analyzed as a time where his antisocial traits were likely reinforced, away from societal constraints. The man who entered prison was fundamentally altered by the experience, setting the stage for the far more horrific crimes that would later define his name. John Gacy served an 18-month prison sentence at the Anamosa State Penitentiary in Iowa following his conviction. During this period, he was consistently described as a model prisoner by institutional reports. His compliant behavior and active participation in assigned duties were noted as key factors in his case management. This conduct played a significant role in the parole board's deliberations. Psychological assessments conducted during his incarceration were a standard part of the process. These evaluations reportedly highlighted his above-average intelligence and his apparent engagement with therapeutic programs. He participated in group sessions, where he was observed to articulate remorse and a desire for rehabilitation. However, some contemporary accounts suggest his participation was superficial, aimed primarily at creating a favorable impression for the authorities responsible for his release. The parole board ultimately granted his early release after he had served a portion of his sentence. His parole was contingent upon several strict conditions designed to monitor his reintegration into society. He was required to maintain steady employment and to continue with psychological counseling as directed by his parole officer. This decision was based on the institutional reports of his good behavior and his perceived progress in therapy. Researchers later analyzing this period note the critical disconnect between his presented rehabilitated self and the latent pathologies that remained unaddressed, a common challenge in criminal psychology where an individual can convincingly mimic reform. His release placed him back into the community, a decision that would later be scrutinized with profound gravity. Yet this carefully constructed image of rehabilitation would soon give way to a new life built upon the very foundations it claimed to have abandoned. After his release from prison in the late 1960s, John Wayne Gacy returned to Chicago, where he sought to rebuild his life. In 1972, he married Carol Hoff, his second wife, establishing a seemingly conventional family life in the suburbs. This period marked a significant effort to construct a respectable public identity, distancing himself from his past. According to recollections of contemporaries, Gacy was described as a driven and ambitious individual during this time. Focused on his business and community standing, he founded a successful construction business, PDM Contractors, which specialized in remodeling and maintenance work. The company grew steadily, securing contracts for numerous projects throughout the Chicago area. Specific business achievements included overseeing the construction of several local stores and managing a team of employees, which brought him financial stability and a degree of local prominence. His professional success was a cornerstone of his new life. Simultaneously, Gacy became increasingly involved in community activities. He joined the local Democratic precinct and actively participated in fundraising events. His community involvement extended to performing as a clown, Pogo at children's parties and hospital visits, a role that further embedded him within the social fabric. Research shows that such deep community engagement can sometimes serve as a mechanism for individuals to reinforce their self-image and gain social validation. Psychological analyses note that this phase of outward success and integration often represents a complex period where an individual attempts to manage internal conflicts through hypernormalcy. In his autobiography, it is mentioned that he felt a strong desire to be seen as a pillar of the community. This deliberate reconstruction of his life, however, existed alongside the development of the behaviors that would later define his criminal actions, illustrating a profound dissonance between his public persona and private reality. This carefully constructed public facade would soon fracture with the emergence of an entirely different persona. The emergence of Pogo the Clown represented a jarring bifurcation in John Wayne Gacy's public identity. He meticulously crafted this persona, designing his own costumes and developing a unique clowning style. His performances at countless children's parties and local charity events in the 1970s painted a picture of a dedicated community man. Neighbors and parents saw only a jovial entertainer. One attendee recalled, "He was the highlight of the party, making balloon animals and laughing with the kids. You would never suspect a thing." Psychologists note that the adoption of an alternate identity can serve as a psychological mask, allowing an individual to compartmentalize aspects of their psyche. For Gacy, the Pogo character may have provided a socially acceptable vessel for his need for control and attention. A stark contrast to his hidden life, the clown's exaggerated makeup and costume created a literal barrier between his internal turmoil and his public performance. This duality allowed him to operate within his community with an air of normalcy and trust. Research into such personas suggests they can be a form of profound dissociation, where the individual enacts a role completely separate from their self-perception. In his own statements, Gacy once remarked on the freedom the costume provided. Though the exact context remains debated by experts, the clown became not just a disguise but an integral part of his complex psychological landscape, enabling his public facade to coexist with his private actions for nearly a decade. Witnesses from that time remember a man who seemed to genuinely lose himself in the performance, a chilling detail in retrospect. This disturbing duality would soon manifest in a series of tragic events, beginning in the spring of 1972. The first disappearances began in the spring of 1972, marking a grim new chapter. Timothy Jack McCoy, a 16-year-old boy, was last seen on May 6th after leaving a Greyhound bus station. He had reportedly accepted a ride from John Wayne Gacy. His disappearance set a tragic pattern, as Gacy frequently hired young men for his construction business, PDM Contractors. This employment strategy provided a steady stream of potential victims, often targeting those who were transient or in vulnerable economic situations. By the summer, another young man vanished. John Bukovich, age 18, was last seen in July after confronting Gacy over unpaid wages for construction work he had performed. His disappearance, following a direct financial dispute, suggested a chilling escalation. Researchers note that the perpetrator's control over his employees created a power dynamic ripe for exploitation. The circumstances of these early cases shared a common thread. The victims were last seen in the company of their employer, a man who was simultaneously building a public persona as a charitable clown. The timeline continued into the autumn. Darrell Sampson, a 17-year-old, disappeared on October 6th after telling friends he was going to a job interview. Then in mid-December, 19-year-old Randall Reffitt vanished without a trace on the 16th, followed just 2 days later by the disappearance of another teenager, Samuel Stapleton. The close succession of these events in the final month of 1972 indicated a rapidly accelerating compulsion. Psychological studies suggest such patterns can reflect a perpetrator's growing confidence and the breakdown of internal inhibitions. For the families of these young men, the year ended not with celebration, but with the agonizing silence of unanswered questions, a prelude to the horror yet to be uncovered. As the new year dawned, this escalating pattern would soon reveal a chilling evolution in methodology that authorities had yet to comprehend. John Gacy's modus operandi evolved significantly over his criminal timeline, beginning with relatively simple lures and escalating into a calculated system of deception and control. Initially, he approached young men and boys near bus stations or in downtown Chicago, offering them work or money. His status as a local contractor and community figure, including his participation in charity events as a clown, provided a veneer of trustworthiness that disarmed potential victims. Police investigations later revealed that Gacy often used his business, PDM contractors, as a pretext, promising construction jobs or quick cash payments to entice individuals to his home. As his confidence grew, so did the sophistication of his methods. Gacy began employing a pair of handcuffs, demonstrating them as a magic trick or a novelty before using them to restrain his victims. This act served a dual purpose. It established his dominance while masking his violent intentions under the guise of playful interaction. Once the handcuffs were secured, he would often introduce a rope trick, which was in reality a torture technique known as a tourniquet, used to strangle and torment his victims. Psychological assessments note this escalation reflects an increasing need for total domination and the infliction of prolonged suffering, moving beyond mere homicide to a ritualized process. Investigative reports from the late 1970s detail a chilling pattern. He would typically lure victims to his Norwood Park residence, often on the pretense of discussing a job or sharing drugs and alcohol. The handcuffs and ropes became his signature tools, with the subsequent torture sessions sometimes lasting for hours. Law enforcement discovered that many victims were buried in the crawl space beneath his house, a grim testament to his methodical and repeated actions. Researchers suggest this spatial containment of his crimes within his own home illustrates a profound compartmentalization, allowing his public persona as a jovial clown and businessman to coexist with his private brutality. The development of his modus operandi, therefore, charts a path from opportunistic predation to a highly organized and ritualized series of acts, all shielded by a carefully constructed and trusted public identity. This systematic refinement of his methods would soon confront the physical reality of his own home's limited space. The crawl space beneath John Wayne Gacy's house transformed into a clandestine graveyard, a cramped earthen vault holding the remains of numerous young men. As the number of victims grew, Gacy faced the practical challenge of space management. He began arranging the bodies in a specific, layered pattern, often placing newer victims on top of or adjacent to older ones. Forensic excavations later revealed that the bodies were not simply dumped. They were positioned, some with their arms crossed or items of clothing carefully arranged, suggesting a method to the macabre process of concealment. To manage the limited area and control the odor of decomposition, Gacy employed crude engineering methods. He would cover the bodies with a layer of lime, a substance mistakenly believed to accelerate decomposition and mask smells, before backfilling the area with dirt. This created a stratified burial ground directly beneath the floorboards of his home. The crawl space itself, measuring approximately 5 feet in height, required him to work in a constricted, hunched position, a physical manifestation of the confined and secretive nature of his crimes. Forensic analysis detailed a horrifyingly systematic arrangement. Anthropologists and crime scene investigators meticulously documented the positions of 26 sets of remains recovered from this space. The bodies were found in distinct clusters, indicating they were buried at different times. Some victims were discovered mere inches beneath the surface, while others were found at a slightly greater depth, illustrating the incremental filling of the available space over several years. This spatial organization points to a calculated, albeit gruesome, logistical operation, turning a structural component of his house into a permanent, hidden tomb. The sheer number of individuals interred there created a dense, overlapping burial site that would later stun investigators and the public alike. How then did the man responsible for this hidden graveyard manage to function in the world outside his home, living with the horrors? Required a profound psychological division within John Wayne Gacy. He meticulously maintained his public persona as a successful contractor and dedicated community figure, even serving as a precinct captain in his local Democratic Party. This public life stood in stark, chilling contrast to the private atrocities occurring within his Norwood Park home. Psychologists note that such extreme compartmentalization allows an individual to wall off conflicting aspects of their identity, preventing cognitive dissonance from shattering their carefully constructed facade. For Gacy, this meant that Pogo the Clown, who entertained at children's parties, could coexist with the man who committed murder. His family and neighbors largely perceived him as a jovial, hardworking, and generous man. He was known for organizing block parties and contributing to community events, creating a shield of normalcy, according to recollections from contemporaries. His wife at the time recalled his frequent irritability and the strange odors he attributed to plumbing problems, yet she noted he could shift into a charming host in an instant. A neighbor once mentioned, "He was the last person you would ever suspect. He seemed so normal, so involved." This ability to seamlessly toggle between identities is a hallmark of this psychological fracture. Research into similar cases shows this double life demands a constant, exhausting performance. Gacy's autobiography mentions his drive to be seen as a pillar of the community, a desire that perhaps fueled his need to conceal his monstrous actions. That psychological compartmentalization was not perfect, however. Cracks would occasionally appear in his carefully managed exterior, manifesting as sudden outbursts of anger or bizarre explanations for unusual activities around his property. These fleeting moments were often dismissed by those who knew him, a testament to the powerful illusion of normalcy he projected. The man who lived next door to a hidden graveyard was, to the outside world, just a friendly neighbor. But this carefully constructed facade of normalcy would soon shatter completely when a single disappearance exposed the horrifying truth. On a cold December evening in 1978, 15-year-old Robert Pace told his mother he was meeting a contractor about a summer job and vanished. His disappearance broke a chilling pattern wide open. The contractor was John Wayne Gacy, a man already interviewed by police regarding other missing young men. This single tip shifted the entire investigation's focus onto the seemingly respectable suburbanite. Police immediately secured a warrant to search Gacy's home. The initial search revealed minor stolen property, but a subsequent, more thorough search uncovered a chilling piece of evidence. A receipt from a pharmacy where Robert Pace had last been seen was found in Gacy's kitchen. This concrete link provided the crucial probable cause needed to intensify the investigation into Gacy's activities over the preceding years. Investigators began meticulously cross-referencing Gacy's employment records and travel with timelines of missing persons reports. They discovered a horrifying pattern connecting him to numerous unsolved cases of young men and boys. The most damning evidence, however, was still hidden. As one detective noted in his memoirs, the smell from the crawl space was unforgettable. Forensic teams were brought in to excavate the area beneath Gacy's house. The excavation revealed the remains of 29 victims, with more bodies discovered buried elsewhere on his property. This grim discovery confirmed the worst fears and connected Gacy to a staggering number of murders. Psychological studies suggest such compartmentalization, the ability to separate a public life from monstrous private acts, is a common trait in such cases. The disappearance of one boy, Robert Pace, ultimately exposed the full horror of John Wayne Gacy's double life, bringing a painful resolution to dozens of families and forever altering the community's sense of safety. Yet this painful resolution stood in stark contrast to the deceptive normalcy that still masked the full extent of the horror. The suburban home appeared ordinary from the street, a stark contrast to the aura concealed beneath its foundations. On December 21, 1978, investigators obtained a warrant to search the property thoroughly. The initial search revealed suspicious items, but the true scale of the atrocity was hidden in a dark, cramped crawl space. The forensic excavation began, a grim and meticulous process that would continue for weeks. Investigators carefully removed the earth, uncovering one body then another. The number of victims quickly became staggering. Ultimately, the remains of 29 young men and boys were recovered from beneath the house. Forensic anthropologists worked painstakingly to identify each set of remains, a puzzle of unimaginable proportions. The crawl space, only 3 feet high, became known as the House of Horrors. Lead investigator Joseph Kozenczak recalled the overwhelming nature of the discovery. He stated, "We were not prepared for the sheer number of victims. Each new discovery felt like a physical blow to the entire team. That psychological impact on the first responders was profound and lasting." Another investigator noted, "The smell of death permeated everything. It was a scene that redefined evil for every single person who witnessed it." The recovery operation was a landmark case in forensic science, pushing the limits of criminal investigation at the time. The precise documentation and excavation were critical for the subsequent legal proceedings. This methodical uncovering of evidence provided the undeniable proof needed to confront the perpetrator with the full weight of his crimes, forever marking a dark chapter in American criminal history. Yet the meticulous forensic work stood in stark contrast to the chaotic evil it sought to document, setting the stage for the perpetrator's own account. John Wayne Gacy's confession unfolded over multiple interrogations beginning in late December 1978. He initially admitted to around 30 murders, but the final count he provided reached 33. He described his methods with chilling detail, explaining how he lured young men to his home with promises of work or money, then assaulted and murdered them. He recounted using a rope trick to subdue his victims, a method he claimed to have learned as a clown. His descriptions were so graphic and precise that investigators were left deeply disturbed, with some veteran officers reporting lasting psychological effects from the encounter. During these sessions, his demeanor was often described as calm and matter-of-fact, almost detached from the horrific nature of his crimes. Psychological analysts note that this flat effect is a common defense mechanism, allowing an individual to discuss traumatic events without experiencing the associated emotions. Gacy frequently attempted to rationalize his actions, at times blaming alcohol or suggesting a other John within him was responsible. He portrayed his victims as willing participants or as individuals who had provoked him, a clear effort to mitigate his own guilt in the narrative. He provided specific information that only the perpetrator could know, leading police to the locations of additional bodies buried in the crawl space of his home. This cooperation was seen by some as a twisted attempt to regain a semblance of control. Research into criminal psychology suggests that such detailed confessions can serve as a final performance, a way for the offender to command the narrative one last time. The sheer volume of his admissions and the logistical nightmare of recovering the remains overwhelmed the Cook County Sheriff's Department, marking one of the most extensive and gruesome murder investigations in American history. His confession did not signal remorse but rather a final, calculated revelation of the horror he had meticulously concealed for years. This overwhelming evidence of calculated criminal behavior consequently forced the legal system to confront a fundamental question about the perpetrator's mental state. The insanity defense became a central controversy in John Wayne Gacy's trial. Legal teams debated whether severe mental illness could absolve criminal responsibility. Psychological evaluations aimed to determine his state of mind during the crimes. Prosecution experts argued Gacy understood his actions were wrong. They cited his elaborate methods to conceal evidence and his apparent normalcy in business dealings. One psychiatrist testified Gacy possessed antisocial personality traits, characterized by a disregard for others' rights. Defense experts presented a contrasting view of a profoundly disturbed individual. They suggested he experienced dissociative episodes, a psychological phenomenon where one feels detached from their own thoughts or actions. Specific assessments reportedly indicated borderline personality organization with narcissistic features. The court heard competing interpretations of psychiatric results. One evaluation noted his high intelligence and capacity for manipulation. Another pointed to a history of head injuries and possible neurological impacts. The defense referenced his difficult childhood, including a reportedly domineering father. Ultimately, the jury rejected the insanity plea after deliberating for less than 2 hours. They found him legally sane and responsible for his actions. This case continues to fuel debate over the legal standards for insanity and the limits of psychological testimony in criminal courts. The competing expert analyses highlight the enduring challenge of objectively measuring a defendant's mental state at the time of their offenses. These challenges in assessing mental state become particularly evident when examining how defendants present themselves during trial proceedings. After deliberating for less than 2 hours, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all 33 counts of murder. The swiftness of the decision reflected the overwhelming evidence presented during the trial. On Friday, March 13, 1980, the judge formally sentenced John Wayne Gacy to death for each of the 12 murders tied to the death penalty statute at that time, totaling 12 death sentences. The remaining 21 murder convictions resulted in concurrent terms of natural life in prison, ensuring he would never be eligible for parole. The courtroom experienced a palpable shift in atmosphere upon the sentencing pronouncement. While some family members of the victims wept quietly in a long-awaited moment of resolution, others sat in stoic silence, their grief having solidified into a permanent weight. For the broader community, the legal conclusion brought a complex mixture of relief and somber reflection. The sheer number of victims, many of them young men and boys, left an indelible scar on the public consciousness, forcing a painful re-examination of community safety and trust. Researchers note that such legal conclusions rarely provide full emotional closure for those affected by profound trauma. The finality of the death sentence, while delivering a form of societal justice, could not restore the lost lives or erase the years of uncertainty and pain endured by the families. The case left a lasting legacy on criminal investigations and highlighted the profound, long-term emotional impact violent crimes have on an entire community, extending far beyond the immediate courtroom. Yet this profound community impact stands in stark contrast to the psychological profile of the man at the center of the case, whose inner world operated on entirely different principles. John Wayne Gacy exhibited clear narcissistic personality patterns throughout his life, characterized by a pervasive need for admiration, a profound lack of empathy, and a grandiose sense of self-importance. In his public life, he cultivated an image as a successful businessman and a dedicated community volunteer, famously performing as a clown for charitable events. This public persona required constant validation and praise from others. According to recollections of contemporaries, he was often described as charming yet manipulative, using his social standing to gain trust and admiration. His lack of empathy was starkly evident in his criminal behavior. He showed no remorse for the murders of at least 33 young men and boys, viewing his victims as objects for his own gratification. Psychological research on narcissism in violent offenders indicates that such a profound empathy deficit allows individuals to dehumanize others, facilitating heinous acts without emotional conflict. Studies show that narcissistic traits can interact with other psychological factors, creating a dangerous propensity for violence when the individual's fragile self-esteem is threatened. Gacy's grandiosity manifested in his belief that he was above the law and could outsmart authorities. In his autobiography, he is quoted as stating, "I felt I was smarter than everyone else in the room." This sense of superiority and entitlement is a hallmark of narcissistic pathology. Psychologists note that this grandiosity often serves as a defense mechanism, masking deep-seated insecurities that may have roots in early developmental experiences. For Gacy, a challenging childhood and reported conflicts with his father may have contributed to the formation of these maladaptive personality patterns, which ultimately found their most destructive expression in his double life. Yet this carefully constructed self-image would soon find its most disturbing counterpart in a seemingly innocent alter ego. The clown persona served as a complex psychological mask for John Wayne Gacy, creating a stark separation between his public identity and private actions. Pogo the Clown was not merely a costume, but a calculated tool for compartmentalization. This allowed him to dissociate from the horrific acts he committed while wearing his ordinary clothes. Psychological experts note that such a distinct alter ego can enable an individual to house contradictory aspects of their personality, with the mask providing both literal and figurative concealment. This performative identity was key to his social operations, granting him unparalleled access and trust within his community. As a registered clown who performed at children's parties and charitable events, he was perceived as a figure of joy and generosity. This benevolent public image effectively disarmed potential suspicion. Research into similar cases shows that a trusted community persona can create a powerful shield, making it difficult for others to perceive the underlying threat. He leveraged this acceptance, with his clown character becoming a perfect lure. In his autobiography, he mentioned the clown as a way to connect with people, a statement experts analyze as a reflection of his need for control and admiration. The performance allowed him to feel powerful and beloved, fulfilling needs that his ordinary life could not. Psychologists highlight that for some individuals, a performative role provides a sanctioned outlet for social interaction that their unadorned personality finds difficult to navigate. The clown makeup and costume thus became a psychological permission slip, enabling behaviors hidden behind a facade of entertainment and goodwill. This duality was central to his ability to operate for years without detection, his true self camouflaged by the exaggerated smile of a clown. This psychological masking naturally evolved into a more systematic division of self, where maintaining separate identities became a carefully managed practice. John Gacy maintained two distinct identities for over a decade, a feat requiring profound psychological compartmentalization. As a successful suburban contractor, he organized community events and was perceived as a family man. Simultaneously, he committed a series of brutal murders, completely separating this activity from his public life. This double life functioned through specific mental mechanisms that allowed him to avoid the emotional and moral consequences of his actions. Cognitive dissonance theory explains how individuals reduce psychological discomfort from holding conflicting beliefs. Gacy likely mitigated the dissonance between his self-image as a pillar of the community and his violent actions by devaluing his victims. Research shows that offenders often employ moral disengagement strategies, such as dehumanization, to justify their behavior. Psychologists note that by mentally placing his victims outside his moral circle, Gacy could temporarily suspend his ethical standards. This process enabled him to shift between identities without apparent internal conflict. In his autobiography, Gacy mentioned compartmentalizing his life into different boxes, a telling self-description of this psychological division. He reportedly maintained a strict schedule, conducting business by day and engaging in his criminal activities at night. This rigid separation of time and space reinforced the mental barrier between his two worlds. Studies on double lives indicate that such physical and temporal boundaries are crucial for maintaining compartmentalization over extended periods. The eventual collapse of this system occurred only when external evidence became impossible to ignore, leading to his arrest in December 1978. But the system's collapse would reveal another carefully constructed reality, one that would persist long after the courtroom doors closed. John Gacy spent nearly 14 years on death row at the Menard Correctional Center in Illinois. During this period, he produced numerous paintings, many depicting clowns, which he often sold or gave to supporters. He maintained extensive correspondence with individuals outside the prison, a practice some psychologists note as a continuation of his manipulative patterns, seeking to control perceptions and maintain a network of influence. In his autobiography, he mentions using these letters to present himself as a victim of circumstance. His legal battle to avoid execution was protracted. Gacy filed multiple appeals, arguing primarily about his mental competency during the original trial. He attempted to have his conviction overturned, claiming ineffective assistance of counsel. These legal maneuvers delayed his execution for over a decade. Records show he remained largely unremorseful, focusing his energy on the appeals process rather than expressing contrition for his crimes. Prison staff reported that his behavior was often calm and controlled, yet he was described as manipulative in his interactions. He sometimes painted for charity events, a paradoxical act that researchers suggest was a calculated attempt to craft a more sympathetic public persona. According to recollections from contemporaries, he closely followed media coverage about his case. Psychological analyses indicate this sustained manipulation, even in confinement, reflected a deep-seated need for validation and a refusal to accept responsibility. His final appeal was denied in the late 1990s, and he was executed by lethal injection in May 1994. But what final words would someone who spent years manipulating his public image offer when facing death? On the morning of May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection at the Stateville Correctional Center. His final meal was declined, and his last words, directed to the superintendent, were a simple, "Kiss my ass." Witnesses reported his death was medically sterile and devoid of overt emotion, a stark contrast to the brutality of his crimes. For the families of his 33 victims, this moment represented a long-awaited judicial conclusion. Many expressed that while the execution did not erase their profound grief, it finally provided a definitive end to the legal process. The state-sanctioned death offered a form of societal resolution, officially closing one of America's most notorious serial murder cases. Psychological analyses note that such finality can be crucial for survivors, allowing a shift from a state of prolonged anticipation to one where healing can more fully begin. The execution's clinical nature underscored the modern evolution of capital punishment, moving away from spectacle toward a more administrative procedure. This event remains a significant case study in the complex intersection of justice, closure, and the state's ultimate power over life and death. But how did this landmark case fundamentally reshape our understanding of the criminal mind and the methods used to pursue such offenders? Our journey into the life and mind of John Wayne Gacy concludes. We have explored a Chicago childhood, marked by a troubled father-son dynamic and early signs of psychological distress. The hospitalization that changed everything, coupled with social struggles and isolation, set a challenging course. Early encounters with sexuality, marriage, and family life began, but were overshadowed by a first criminal conviction and a prison experience leading to early release. Rebuilding in Chicago saw the emergence of Pogo the Clown, a persona that masked the development of a horrifying modus operandi as the first disappearances began. The crawl space became a graveyard, and Gacy lived with unspeakable horrors until the disappearance that broke the case revealed the House of Horrors. His confession and arrest led to an insanity defense controversy, with courtroom behavior and testimony culminating in a verdict and sentencing. Analysis points to narcissistic personality patterns, with the clown persona serving as a psychological mask, enabling compartmentalization and a double life. Life on death row, last statements. An execution followed, leaving a profound impact on criminal profiling and prompting reflection on the banality of evil and the importance of prevention and early intervention. Subscribe to our channel to not miss new episodes. See you soon.